And Ukraine launching a major nighttime attack on Russia. Meanwhile, President Trump is saying Iran has violated the ceasefire with the US. Joining us now to discuss is Kervin O'Quinn, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for US Army and host of the This Week Explained podcast. So, Kervin, good afternoon. And I want to start with the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian drone hitting a vessel in the waterway, Trump saying Iran's actions are foolish. What are your initial thoughts, your reaction?
Yeah, first of all, Don, so good to see you again. It's always good talking to you. I think, first of all, here, President Trump is right to highlight that. But look, Iran knows what they're doing. They know that the West has no appetite for another attack within the Iranian borders, and so what Iran's going to do here is try to push as much as they can and see how far they can get before new strikes happen within their borders. And so it's interesting here. They're doing this in the Strait of Hormuz and not against the or inside the borders of Israel using their proxies because they know that is going to cause Israel to retaliate against them and Iran, and so they're being very strategic here. And I think that's where we're at. And what President Trump is doing is he's speaking to a global audience here and letting everyone know that look, if something happens, if the West retaliates, if the United States retaliates, it's because Iran did it first. But like I said, there's no appetite here to do that.
Okay, so you're saying maybe Iran is trying to see how far it can push the United States. From what you're saying, am I correct to infer that you think potentially this could happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen in a strategic manner. It's going to stay in the Strait of Hormuz. I know that there, I think in Dubai and other parts of the Gulf countries, there were some air alarms that had gone off, but I don't think Iran is going to target any of the Gulf countries, and I don't think that Iran is going to target U.S. assets or U.S. military assets in the region. What they're going to do is continue to go after these merchant ships and then say, hey, look, we are doing this because the merchant ships are actually going against what Iran has already agreed to. And so this is not a violation of the ceasefire. And they're going to do that enough until there is an appetite for a retaliation strike. Do I think it's going to get to that point? I don't. I think it's highly unlikely that Iran pushes it past that, especially with the World Cup going on right now.
Do you think it's possible or unlikely that even with these attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, these drone attacks, that the U.S. can continue to negotiate with Iran to a peace deal, that not necessarily this entire memorandum is collapsing? What do you think might be the situation?
Yeah, like I think the peace deal is still a ways away. I still don't think it's going to happen in that 60-day time frame that we talked about. But this does not preclude any of the negotiators from continuing to negotiate. So you have diplomatic efforts and you have military efforts, and those two, while they do sometimes cross paths, they are not doing that here. Your diplomatic efforts are still ongoing while these military efforts from Iran are targeting, like I said, merchant vessels. Now, if so there is this point where Iran could make a mistake, and one of those drones or one of their missiles does go off course. And if that does happen, and a U.S. military asset is struck, then all bets are off. We're back to retaliatory strikes, and I don't think it's going to be tit for tat strikes. I think that you have a president and President Trump who is just going to be fed up with everything. And he's just going to let the U.S. military go do shock and awe in Iran again. But we are not there right now.
Definitely. We're not there right now. It's still a bit early to see what happens, but we'll keep a close eye on this. Let me talk to you about the Russia-Ukraine war now. Reports are saying Kyiv launched what appears to be one of the biggest drone assaults since the war started. What's going through your mind right now when you hear this?
Well, Donna, the first thing that's going through my mind is the analysts were wrong. I was wrong. We said for so long that a war of attrition favors Russia. And what we're seeing now, as this war continues years and years and years, is that Ukraine adapted. They have really created this new drone war, right? So we talk about drone war, and we think of the United States and their large UAVs that are sending Hellfire missiles onto targets. And what Ukraine has done is they've condensed that into these first person view drones and this counter drone warfare that's really getting to now. It's gone from a defensive effort early on in this war to now an offensive effort. We're seeing Moscow, we're seeing St. Petersburg, we're seeing the illegally annexed portion of Crimea now be struck. And now Putin has to answer for that because the people of Russia are feeling this. This is no longer some far off, distant conflict that's happening in another country. This is happening in Moscow and it's happening in St. Petersburg. And the Russian government's going to have to wake up to this.
So, I mean, what is Ukraine's strategy, military goal right now, striking deep into Russia, attacking critical infrastructure? Is it to hit the funding source? Hit the funding source behind Russia's military? Can you elaborate on what the goal is?
I think it's twofold. I think you're right there. It's the funding, right? But the other thing is the logistics. Logistics is, take it from me, logistics wins wars. And if you lose those logistics, that oil flow to fuel those tanks and fuel the trucks that are getting to the front lines, if the fuel no longer makes it there, then your logistics no longer makes it. Your aircraft can no longer fly, and that is a problem for any military. And I think that's what Ukraine is trying to hit at. And then they're hitting Moscow because they're trying to diminish the morale of the Russian people. If they don't care about the Russian military because they're going to do what they want, but if they can diminish the morale of the Russian people, that is going to start possibly these Gen Z uprisings that we're seeing in Southeast Asia and in Africa. It could happen in Russia. It could happen against Putin, and that is going to be dangerous for Putin and for the Russian government. And I think that's what Ukraine is looking at. And look, they're making a choice here, and it could fall flat, or it could be the thing that turns this conflict in Ukraine's favor and has them actually win this conflict.
Okay, let me just piggyback off of what you just said. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is saying Moscow will burn if Russian attacks continue. So you're saying earlier that Ukraine is adapting, and after this show of strength by Kyiv, what does this statement mean, and should Putin take it seriously?
I think absolutely Putin should take it seriously. But like I said, this is to the Russian people. And what I failed to mention there is I think it's also for Western European resolve, and it could also be a push to the United States. Hey, look, we are not this small country that is trying to defend ourselves. We are actually pushing the front lines back in our favor, and if you would just continue to support us, this war is not going to last forever. You continue to support us, we're going to diminish the Russian empire, we're going to diminish the Russian military, and that is good news for Western Europe, for places like Poland, like Finland, Sweden, Georgia. Those countries are going to be safer if Ukraine gets more Western support and they are able to accomplish a complete victory in this conflict.
Okay, if you were to guess right now, do you think Ukraine has thoroughly convinced Putin at this moment that he cannot win this war cheaply?
Oh, Don, always with the great questions, Don. That's why I love coming on here. That is a great. But I don't think that they have convinced Putin yet. I think they've convinced some within his circle. But they're not trying to convince Putin. They're trying to convince the rest of the world that they can keep this going and to not give up, never give up, and that they can push back. They think they're in a battle between good and evil. They are the good. Russia is the evil in this, and in battles between good and evil, good always prevails. That's their thought. and that they're going to continue to prevail. But they have already reached Putin because he has reached out and has said he is ready to negotiate. Whether this is in good faith or not, we don't know, but he is ready to negotiate. That means something has changed.
So that also means I would assume that if Russia wants to negotiate, that means Putin sees maybe Ukraine at a stronger position now than before. Is Ukraine in a stronger negotiating position compared to maybe just a few months ago?
Yeah, they absolutely are. So like maybe 6 months ago, Ukraine was in a pretty strong position. They had pushed back and they had regained some of the territory that they had lost during this conflict. Then over the last 3 months, Russia made their own offensives that had reached back and pushed those front lines back towards the Ukrainian border. But I think what we're seeing now is so we've seen this ebb and flow, and now it is flowing back towards the Russian border. So Ukraine is pushing back. So we are probably at the same point we were about 6 months ago when we started all of these discussions on let's get the two leaders together in good faith negotiations because Ukraine is at a good point to negotiate. We're back to that. Ukraine is at a good point to negotiate again.
Okay, I just want to ask you one more question, and this relates to, in part, the Russia-Ukraine war and also China's ambition towards Taiwan. Do you believe at any level that because of this war, where the world is seeing that Russia is struggling to some degree to take over a smaller country, could that be a deterrent to China, which has very similar ambitions to Russia of taking over a smaller country?
Yeah, and very much so. I think this is a good case study for Xi, for the CCP, the PLA, the Chinese of trying to take over Taiwan. First of all, I would say first, this is Taiwan's not Ukraine. I think it's more difficult to take Taiwan. And in studying, and I have in my career studied what an invasion would look like, and it would be very difficult for the Chinese. I don't think they want to do that. I think they would rather influence the elections, and I think that's what they're trying to do now is influence elections for 2028 in Taiwan. And I think that an invasion is a last ditch effort. And I do believe, I really do think, in my assessment is it's highly likely that Xi is seeing what's happening in Ukraine right now and going, that wasn't supposed to be that difficult. And look at what's happening to Russia. It could be far worse for China in Taiwan if we try to do something.
Yeah, you raise a good point that China may be using the influence operations, asymmetric warfare against Taiwan to take it over rather than kinetic war. Well, Kervin, it's always good to hear your insight. Thank you very much and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. It's always good to be here and stay safe out there.